Hello everybody, Kris Gethin here and welcome to another episode of the Knowledge and Mileage podcast. This interview has been a long time coming. We were going to get together a couple of times, then he headed off around the world, went to Australia. Then we were supposed to meet at the Arnold Classic, a show that this gentleman has actually placed second in. And then obviously everything just went a little bit tits up, we'd call it. And the coronavirus happened. I was in Columbus, but this gentleman didn't make it. And that gentleman right here, I'm proud to announce, is Ben Pakulski. Welcome to the show, brother.
Man, it's an absolute privilege and an honor, and super excited as always to have a chat.
Yeah, it's always good to have a chin wag with you, my man. So there are going to be a few people out there. Obviously, I have quite a large bodybuilding following, but there are a lot of people out there that actually follow me from an endurance aspect or from obviously biohacking, which is you are heavily involved in. And we have the typical people who just want to get in shape that may not know who you are or your training style or anything like that. So if you could give us a little bit of a backstory on who Ben Pakulski is, that would be great.
Yeah, man, I grew up in Canada, very athletic little kid. My biggest pain as a child was growing up in a family of overweight, obese for sure, alcoholics, and having an awareness as early as 7 years old that I just didn't want to be like that. And I didn't know how I was going to get out, but I didn't want to be like that. And around 15, I found, exercise, and I wouldn't call it bodybuilding at the time, but I found exercise and it made me a better athlete. It made me faster in sports. So I kind of quickly became addicted to it. As early as 15 years old, I remember going to the gym before school and after school, and it just made me feel good. And I was like, God, I never had anything that made me feel this good. And then, found some bodybuilding magazines, and the irony of it is I remember seeing Natural Awesome Body in my first Flex magazine. I was like, oh man, that's gross. I don't ever want to look like that. And then, fast forward a few years, I went to the Mr. Olympia contest in '98, and I was hooked. I was 17 years old, and I remember seeing all the biggest guys in the world on stage, and I was hooked. I was like, this is what I want to do. And I think the blessing of that is, I was talking to one of my mentoring clients about it this morning, is so many people set these goals and they go, well, no one around me, I'm doing the best of the people around me, or I'm doing the best of the people I know. And that was my blessing at a young age, is that I didn't give a shit about the people around me. I was comparing myself to the best in the world from as early as I can remember. So I think there's a lesson to be learned there. And, for anyone who wants to achieve success, is like, stop comparing yourself to your friends and your family and the people in your town and the people in your gym or wherever. You have to compare yourself to, where you want to go. You compare yourself to a world-class standard. And that started for me as early as 17. And people are like, man, you're putting on so much muscle, you're getting so big. And I literally would show them a picture of Flex Wheeler or Dorian Yates. But man, until I look like this, I'm nothing. And that was my belief. And it wasn't from a negative perspective. It was just from a standard perspective. And every workout for me was never about, having the best workout today. It was about, man, like, what do I have to do? What is the process to get me to that Olympia stage? And, that was my tunnel focus from the time I was 17. That was my objective, like climbing the top of a mountain, like finishing the Ironman triathlon. There was nothing that was going to stand in my way. And as I went to university. So I put my bodybuilding training, or still trained, but put my competing on hold until after I was done university. Went to school in Canada for 4 years. As soon as I was done, I made a commitment to myself that I would compete within 6 months. Won the first show, won the second show, and then people started paying me to work out. And I was like, okay, this sounds like fun. I got a sponsorship from a local company in Canada where I grew up, and then won Mr. Canada 2008, and then immediately started competing as a pro in 2009 and did very well. I was very, I always believed in myself, right? And nobody else seemed to. The irony of my career was, when I started bodybuilding, everyone said, hey man, you're never going to do it because your legs have no sweep and your shoulders are too narrow. So if you fast forward to my career, and if you look at pictures online, you'll see what became my strengths. And I'm the kind of guy who says, tell me I can't do it, and I'm going to still stick two middle fingers to the world and do it twice. And that was my career, man. And then, fast forward to 2016, I retired after having a fun career. And now pursuing, like yourself, man, health and betterment, and taking all those amazing lessons that I learned and I was afforded the opportunity to experience in bodybuilding and all the discipline, and applying it into business and applying into optimizing my life and being a great dad.
Interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned that your delts and your legs were deemed as a weakness by other people. So would you say that scarred you to a certain degree to turn that weakness into a weapon? Yeah. Because your legs and your delts, especially your quads and your calves, are just horrendously huge.
Yeah. I was just always the type of person who was a rebel, man. Like if you tell me to do something, I'm like, yeah. You tell me I can't do something, and then I'm going to like shove it up your, you know. So I remember the three things that I remember like clear as day in my head, and I remember exactly who said them. And it was multiple people. I was like, hey man, you're never going to have the leg sweep, because I didn't when I started, I didn't sweep. And then you're not going to have the delts. And the other one that really resonated with me, this one boss that I had at a gym that I worked at said, you're never going to do what it takes to get in shape. And man, that just every day in my head when I was preparing for the Olympia and I was playing for the Arnold, I was like, I literally thank you. Like in my brain, I was like, fuck you and thank you at the same time, right? And so, you know, again, the guy probably doesn't even remember saying it to me, but it stuck a chord in my heart. And I was like, hey man, for the rest of my life, like I will always persist beyond what people think I can do. I will always do more than is expected of me because of those people. And I'm so grateful for that, right? And some people hold grudges against those people. And I'm like, man, if it wasn't for them saying that at an early age, I may not have been the person that I am.
Yeah. You know, I can totally relate to that, because I remember somebody saying to me many, many years ago, a friend of mine who knew nothing about weight training or bodybuilding, he said, why are your carbs so skinny? You know, if you've got quite large upper legs, why are your carbs so skinny? And he was just being honest. It was just an innocent question, but that scarred me for the rest of my life. And it's the same thing. You really thank that person, because you know how painful it is to train carbs. It's like, okay, I'm going to continue to train them through failure as if someone's got a gun to my head, or as Dorian once said to me, you've got to be as desperate for it as you are to breathe. So that's what I just consistently thought, how desperate am I for this? And that scarring really, really does help you. It can hinder some people, but it helps people like us.
It's always perspective, man. And there's a story behind my calves too. I don't know if you've heard this before, but I saw a picture of Dorian when I was 16. I think it was a Flex magazine. And I tore out all the pictures and I posted them on the wall in front of the calf machine. So the calf machine, there's 3 calf machines in my gym. And no shit, I went in there every day for 5 years straight. And that's probably 7 days a week most days. And I trained calves for 30 minutes every single day before I trained. So that's how my calves got to where they were. People like, oh, your calves genetically blessed. Maybe, but at the same time, like I literally every single day for 5 years just brutalized myself. And I was very blessed to have a training partner who was, you know, looking back and now he's still one of the best friends in the world, but he had a screw loose, right? He was one of those guys who really, he had an older brother. They train harder than still any human being that I've ever met. And that's how I learned from the time I was 15. Like that's what I thought training was meant to be. And that's what I thought everyone else was doing. And then when you start to train with these guys who you idolize as a kid, you're like, oh, well, there's not really many guys doing it. I'm sure there's some, but not very many. And that was a blessing for me, man. That was you know, that obsessive focus, because, you know, second place wasn't an option. Being the best in my gym wasn't even on my radar. It was like, how do you become the best in the world?
Interesting. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of people listening now thinking to themselves, okay, should I train carbs every day? What about my biceps? My biceps are a weakness. Should I train them every day now? So, you know, how do you articulate that for somebody to apply to themselves with a weakness?
Well, my answer is yes, and I'll tell you why. So if you're new to something, like at your level, Kris, it would make no sense, because your nervous system's ability to contract that muscle is tremendous. My nervous system's ability to contract that muscle is tremendous. So every repetition I do is creating significantly more metabolic stress, significantly more demand on the nervous system, significantly more damage to the muscle, because our nervous system is so fine-tuned to contract a large number of muscle fibers per repetition. Whereas someone who's new is not creating a huge amount of muscle damage, a huge amount of neurological stress. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to just, like, you know, if you want to learn how to speak Chinese, if you want to learn how to play the piano, how often would you practice? You know, would once a week be enough, right? So the thing that people don't understand about exercise and about bodybuilding, it's a skill. Every single exercise you do is a skill, right? So we have to learn the skill, just like dribbling a basketball, just like playing certain keys in the piano. You have to learn how to do those specifically at the level of the nervous system. So the nervous system, when you start something new, let's say you and I decide today we're going to start playing guitar. Never played a guitar before in my life, but now I have to learn these really precise and intricate hand movements with both hands, and I need to learn to coordinate them at the level of my brain and the nervous system. So if I can't do that, I can't play the guitar. And that's what people neglect in bodybuilding. It's like every single thing you do is a skill. And until you perfect that skill, your ability, or maybe the ability to go fast and go heavy, is going to be impeded, right? So I can't play a guitar or piano at the same speed as a professional guitarist or Mozart or whomever, right? Like I can't do that until I first learn precision of movement and execution is just nailed. And that's how I view exercise, is like, let's do this with precision first, right? I always say you have to train smart before you train hard, because everyone's so focused, oh, you got to crush it. Yes, but like an example being, if you ran an ultra marathon and no one had ever taught you how to run, some people will get away with it. Some people are going to leave there with broken ankles and knees and hips and everything that's just completely destroyed because nobody ever taught them the skill, the mechanics, right? And how long does it take to learn that? Well, I don't know. Like, it depends how diligent you are. It depends how screwed up you were to begin with, right? So those are the questions that I always run into. And that's kind of where I carve my niche in this business is I'm the guy teaching everyone exercise mastery, right? Like, here's how to learn the skill of all these exercises first. And this is what's missing from a weak body part training. It's not just, hey, go in there and work harder and smash your head against the wall. Right. So Kris, you want to run a faster triathlon or you want to run a faster Ironman, just go run faster, man. Don't worry about your skill. Just fucking run faster would be the dumbest advice anyone could ever give you. Right. It's like, hey man, how do we learn to get better at the swim? Just work harder, Kris. No, like it's fucking precision, man. And that's what most bodybuilders in this world don't get yet. And this is what I'm trying to beat into everyone's head. And you said something when we started the podcast, you said, what is Ben's style of training? I don't have a style of training. It's just correct. And that's sounds egocentric, but that's biomechanically how the body works. I don't think everyone should train like me. I think you should train like you, but learn what your body is most effective and efficient at doing ultimately, right? Using those muscles and challenging those muscles.
Yeah, I totally get that. Taking that over to something endurance-based, such as swimming. I remember when I first started swimming and only had 6 months to get ready for my first event. And I thought, oh my God, I am so unfit. But that wasn't true. I was just inefficient. I was not aerodynamic. And then once I realized that I got the technique down, like I read everything, I watched everything, I listened to everything until I got the technique down. And then within, a very short time, it's like, okay, now I could swim for miles and miles and miles, but just efficiently and pace myself. And I'm sure that if I could feed myself out there, I could go even further, Yeah. And it's just all coming down to efficiency. And obviously I trained with you plenty of times back in 2015 when I was living there in Tampa for about 6 weeks. And I found it kind of soul destroying, not because of the amount of weight that I was picking up, is the amount of weight I wasn't picking up. It was a small amount of weight, but performing it correctly and really focusing not only just on the muscles assisting, the muscles that are being the primary mover now. So for instance, when I was doing like the row, I felt, okay, now it feels like my rhomboids are primary moving this plane of motion as opposed to being an assisting muscle.
Yeah.
Could you, and you have a term for your type of training, which is MI40, and you have obviously the MI40 gym, which is phenomenal. You talk about don't compare yourself to someone else. I compare other people's gyms to yours because it's absolutely phenomenal. So could you explain this training style and how that came about? And was that a part of your bodybuilding career as well?
It really was. So I remember early in my career, it's actually 2007, right before I got my pro card, and I had tremendous knee pain. And I literally couldn't walk. I couldn't do extensions. I couldn't do squats and like that. And it was basically like, I'm not gonna be able to compete this year. I have to take the year off. So I went to see a therapist. And I'd seen every therapist in the city. And then finally one person said, hey, you got to go see this guy, Peter. He's the best. And you got to talk to him. And I was like, he's also a bodybuilder. I was like, okay. So I go see Peter, and Peter, long story short, I mean, it's a funny story, but I won't tell it. Long story short, he fixes my knee in less than an hour. And everyone else in the city had tried for days and weeks and nobody could do anything. Fixes my knee in less than an hour. So right away he had my buy-in. I was like, this guy obviously knows what he's doing. And so he started talking about why it happened. And he said, well, the reason it happened is because of your feet. And I was like, what is it? My knee have to do with my feet? I didn't make the correlation. And so he's like, hey man, let's go in the gym. I want to watch what you do. So he introduced me to this idea of tension. I had never even thought about it before. As a young bodybuilder, it's always like, hey man, just lift heavy, train hard, grit your teeth and get after it. And, I was good at that. But what I wasn't good at is this idea. I was really good at gas pedal. I wasn't good at steering wheel, right? So I could hammer the gas, man. I got into fifth gear all the time, that probably sixth, burning the candle at both ends kind of stuff. And then, but what Peter gave me was a steering wheel, and he made me realize that it's not just about how hard you go, it's learning to direct the tension. So here's an example. Early in my career, I was very well known for having great quads and great delts because I worked so hard on those. But the problem that people didn't see was my knees were killed. My lower back was hurting all the time. My shoulders were hurting all the time. So I was so persistent that I worked through the pain, right? And what I didn't have was other body parts. So my back was weak. My hamstrings were relatively weak. My arms were very weak. My chest wasn't all that good. And what Peter said to me was like, Ben, you don't have weak body parts, right? If you have muscle fiber in your quads, you have the same type of muscle fiber relatively in the rest of your body. and you have the same hormonal environment, you have the same neurological ability. What you're missing is the ability to put tension through there. So now the asterisk that I add there now is like sometimes people have short muscle bellies, in which case it's going to be a lot harder to build them. But most people who have long muscle bellies in one part of their body have long muscle bellies everywhere. It's a genetic thing. So he made me have this realization of like, hey, if I can build one muscle, I can build them all. So what I was doing wrong was I wasn't directing tension. So I was lifting weight rather than directing tension. So here's an example. If I'm moving house and I say, I have to move my fridge and my sofa and, you know, some other large pieces of furniture. And I'm going to invite my friends over. Which friends am I going to invite over? Well, I'm going to invite the biggest ones over because it's going to be easiest for them, right? But your body does the same thing. So your body is always looking for path of least resistance. So your body goes, hey, I've got this big muscle right here that's able to lift this weight. Let me adjust my position. Your body does this unconsciously. I'm going to adjust my position and my body position to the right place so that this muscle can be the prime mover. So what does that mean? When I start lifting, if I have a strength and a weakness, your body will always choose your strength because your body goes, my objective is to lift this weight. So your body always defaults to path of least resistance. But as a bodybuilder, that's not always the goal, right? So what happens with many bodybuilders is strengths get stronger and weaknesses stay weak. And then the gradient and the differential gets bigger and people start getting really tight, right? And that's where tightness comes from, right? Tightness is a sign of weakness. So if we want to learn to develop the weak body parts, it's not just about doing more, lifting heavier and working more often, increasing the volume and frequency and all these things that people say. It's nonsense. You have to learn to direct tension, right? So this idea of precision execution. So an example, if I want to train my chest, I've got the front delts that can work, the biceps, the triceps, the pec minor, the lats that can even contribute to that. I've got 5 or 6 different things that can contribute. Well, my ideal scenario is I want all of those other muscles to do the least amount of work, because no matter what I do, if I've got a 100-pound dumbbell in my hand, I've only got 100 pounds of force. I've only got 100 pounds of resistance. So I want the muscle I'm trying to train to do the greatest amount of work, right? I don't want it to do like 20% of the work. I want it to do as close as I can to 100% of the work. It's not possible, but that's my objective. On every single repetition, I want this muscle to do the greatest percentage of this load that I possibly can. So I'm challenging the muscle. So this is my paradigm, right? My objective in exercise is not to lift weight. My objective is not to do repetitions. 3 sets of 8 to me is fucking stupid. My objective is to challenge the muscle. So, you know, how do I then make sure that this muscle is getting subjected to the greatest amount of work, the greatest amount of challenge at every inch or every millimeter of the rep? Now, this is very specific to muscle building, right? If you're just training for to train or maybe athletics, it may be a completely different end of the spectrum. Muscle building is the most extreme end of the spectrum where I'm just trying to challenge the muscle as much as possible so that I create an internal response, right? What most people miss, most people are focusing on the things that are outside of their body. They're focusing on the external, they're focusing on the sets, the reps, the load, the volume. Those are external variables. Those are only useful if they're creating an internal response, if they're creating an internal result, right? I need this internal response to be tension in the muscle, challenge to the muscle, hormonal responses, upregulation of protein synthesis, all of these internal responses. Well, those responses are exclusively dependent on tension over time, right? Isolated tension to very specific things. And again, that's a long-winded explanation as to where this came about. But effectively, yes, I was using it very early on in my career, and it really allowed me to start to understand. Now, just like any other skill, I wasn't perfect at it in the beginning, right? Unfortunately, like I didn't really start to understand training until probably 2009, was 2008, maybe it was where I really started to get it. And then it was this ascension, just like in what you're doing, Kris. Every time you do an Ironman, you get better. You're like, oh, I did this wrong, I can get better. I did this wrong, I can get better. And all my training just keeps getting better and better and better. Even now, even though my training volume and frequency is much less, my understanding of how to do it is much more. And I could talk about that forever.
So talking about the time under tension, you're going to get some people that'll disagree because they'll say, well, what about creatine? ATP is only going to last so long. If I want to get this amount of reps out in this certain amount of time, I better punch out some, like 8-10 reps because I'm going to run out of ATP. What is your response to that? I'm sure you've been asked that question before.
You're not going to run out of ATP because you're not just dependent on the creatine phosphate system, right? You're dependent on the aerobic system as well. So typically people run out of ATP when their aerobic capacity is poor, right? So your aerobic system, so when you're training in an anaerobic state, you get this, your aerobic system is maxed out in its ability. It's always producing maximum number of ATP. So if someone has poor aerobic fitness and their aerobic system's ability to use fat and replenish ATP is limited, that's going to limit your ability for high-end performance. So there's a whole bunch of levels of complexity, right? So my ability to perform work at the finest level is mostly dependent on ATP production, as you say, and the nervous system. again, I don't think there's any, I've never heard anybody say something like that, Kris, to be honest, where you say, oh, you're going to run out of ATP. Well, you don't really run out of ATP. Your body will upregulate its ability to produce ATP based on demand. So if I say to my body, like, you get it, if I say, hey, I'm going to do sets of 50, your body will figure it out. Your ability to perform high quality work may diminish. But if you do that, let's say we did sets of 50 on a squat every week for the next 10 weeks, by the end of the 50 weeks, or at the end of the next 10 weeks, your ability to do those 50 reps is tremendously increased, right? That's just because your body's upregulating its machinery to produce ATP. So it's just like adapting to anything, there's always this curve of adaptation. So yeah, I mean, I think anyone who would argue that would, like, trying to knock out as many as you can in 10 seconds makes very little sense, because the only thing synonymous with growth is tension. It's not a certain number of reps, right? Like doing 1 rep or 10, the only difference then, again, this is maybe getting too complex for a podcast, but the only difference between doing 1 rep and 10, and let's say we have 30 seconds of time under tension, you can do 1 rep that lasts 30 seconds, or you can do 10. And the only difference in my eyes is the amount of time spent in concentric, the amount of time spent in eccentric, and the amount of time spent in isometric, and the velocity. Obviously, there's a consideration there as far as contractile rate of the fibers, but it's a very limited thought process.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do get caught up too much of the time in the amount of reps, the amount of sets, as opposed to making the reps count. They just count the reps and think, okay, if I accumulate this much because this person is doing that, then I'm going to get a similar result. But like you said, if they're not creating that internal stress for the external result, then what's the point? So when you help people break down a certain movement, do you look at that movement on every body part being the same? Or let's say if that person does have a weaker muscle group, are you training that muscle group different to a stronger muscle group, or is it the same across the board?
No, it has to be different, right? So the kind of the process by which I go about improving weak body parts is always like, where do you stand on the skill continuum, right? Would you rate yourself a 1 out of 5, a 2 out of 5, a 3 out of 5, or a 4 out of 5, or a 5 out of 5? If you're 5 out of 5, that's, many of the things you and I do maybe, and that's, I don't even say I'm a 5 on a lot of things. But let's say if I'm a 5 out of 5, that where I can equate that I'm probably creating a lot of tension. I'm probably really good at contracting this muscle. I'm probably creating a lot of damage. Therefore, I probably need more time to recover, right? So let's say if I'm training, legs, if I'm training, chest and shoulders, maybe my body, if I'm doing a significant amount of volume, needs 3 to 5 days to recover. If I have a weak body part, maybe it only needs 1 to 2 days to recover, because the amount of actual work that's being generated is not as significant. So that's the way I approach it. And as far as like the actual skill, if someone has a weak body part, I see a 1-to-1 correlation with stability. So what does that mean? So if I have a weak body part in the upper body, let's say I have a hard time building my biceps or triceps, most of the time what I'll see is there's 100% correlation. Again, I shouldn't say most of the time, if it's 100% correlation, with the lack of stability at the scapula. So anything in your upper body is dependent on your ability to stabilize your spine and your scapula. Anything at your lower body, as far as quads, hamstrings, and glutes, is dependent on your ability to stabilize your pelvis and your spine, right? So if you can't generate stability at the pelvis, you can't contract the muscles of the lower body, at least efficiently. There'll always be positions of weakness. So we'll assess, like, where are you weak? And then how do we make that stronger? Weakness is always just indicated by instability. So if you go in a position and you either can't contract a muscle, or you go in a position you can't stabilize in that position, we know it's weak. So we need to spend time there. So one thing that's kind of a soundbite that people will remember, or hopefully can remember, is your body will down-regulate muscle contractile ability. So it'll turn off the muscle's ability to contract if it senses instability. So what does that mean? If I get into a position the muscle is weak there, it's because your brain has sensed instability. It's going to literally down-regulate the nervous system's ability to contract. So guess what? If you want to get good there, you have to spend time there, right? Doing more weight and swinging it there, and the body's still not going to learn to contract in that position just because you're swinging your weight there, right? And this comes down, this can get kind of deep if we start going into like understanding the forces in exercise, like the physics of exercise, not the topic of conversation for a podcast. But if you're throwing a weight, there's not any tension being exerted by that muscle in that range. So the goal then is, how do I make this muscle actually do work here? It's this idea of use it or lose it. If I never go somewhere, your brain goes, oh, I don't need to use my any ATP here. I don't need to produce any force. I'm just going to stop sending nervous signals here, right?
Right, got it. Okay. So just crossing over a little bit now onto nutrition, because I know that you look after some athletes and bodybuilders as well, but you experiment quite a lot now, especially since your retirement, keto, carnivore, all sorts of various forms of nutritional protocols.
Yep.
Now, looking back, would you have changed things differently with your nutrition as a competitive bodybuilder? And do you actually apply these various principles now to the athletes that you look after?
Yeah, great question, man. I think I would definitely do things differently. And I think most bodybuilders and most people aspiring to build muscle, again, are focusing on very small number of things, right? Lift heavy, eat more food. That, like you hear guys say that's almost like an axiom in bodybuilding, like lift heavy, eat more food. And I think that's just stupid. Like, I just think it's ridiculous. Is it a piece? Yes. But there's certainly, because like any beginner, right? If you just go to the gym as a beginner, you're going to get results. So any beginner, if you just go, just lift more and eat more. In the beginning, that's going to work for everybody. But there comes a point where like, that just doesn't work anymore. So then what do we have to do, right? So my focus when it comes to the athletes that I work with is not necessarily increasing work, not necessarily increasing consumption. It's increasing the efficacy of those things. Meaning, I need you to train smart. I need your body to not only consume food, but I need to make sure we're optimizing digestion, assimilation, absorption, right? So I'm going deeper on this, and I'm making sure, like, well, what are the things that can affect digestion, assimilation, absorption? Well, stress, gut health, inflammation, insulin resistance, all these things are huge pieces of the puzzle. So in my career, I did focus a lot on consumption, and I honestly think that was one of the reasons why I wasn't always successful, right? One of the things I was criticized for in my career is having a big stomach. If you're 320 pounds, and I was 320 pounds at 5% body fat, you have to eat a lot of food. The likelihood of maintaining that amount of muscle or growing from there without eating an obscene amount of food is very small. So I was like, man, I'm just eating and eating and eating constantly. And anyone at some point in your life, you hated eating just like everybody else, eating so much. And I didn't understand that it wasn't just about what I eat, it's what I absorb. So how can I then support digestion with enzymes and limited stress, and making sure I'm doing some kind of soul recharging stuff, like some walking outside, some breathing, some meditation, some things that are going to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system to allow my body to start absorbing, breaking down, and it being in a place where it's actually prepared to break down and digest food, right? That's a big paradigm shift for most people. And that's one of the biggest tips I give everybody, man. And you're into this space now too, is like, if you're not paying attention to your heart rate variability, therefore your autonomic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, so those three things go together for anyone who hasn't heard this stuff before. If you're not, you are 1000% not optimized, like in any sport, right? There's a huge correlation between quality of performance, ability to build muscle, ability to sleep and recover, ability to focus, that can very easily be quantified with heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is this quantification of the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah, I totally get you there as well, because this is something that I've noticed, because to begin with, you think, is it because I'm just getting older that I don't need to eat as much food? Well, it's not. The things have changed. Like, you're much more present when you eat now. When you cook the food, I'm very conscious of this. When I cook the food, I have to be in a good mood. I don't want to be caught in conversation. I don't want to feel negative at all towards the food that I'm preparing. Wow. And I actually learned some of this from a friend of mine in India. He won't eat out. He will not eat out because he doesn't know how the chef prepared it based on the mood that they were in.
Wow.
So he doesn't do that. It has to be cooked with love, with thought, with thanks, gratefulness. So, I try to do the same when I eat as well. And I make sure that I'm not caught in communication. I'm not scrolling. I'm not reading. I'm present and I'm slow and I'm enjoying that food with, I'd say, meticulous presence. And like you said, you're putting yourself into that parasympathetic nervous system. And I'm sure, when you're a competitive bodybuilder, like all your cardio is probably done on a Stairmaster or in a gym, probably wasn't going for a walk outside in the fresh air, get in the sunlight, and performing a form of active meditation. You were scheduled to do this duty, and kind of that was it. So you was definitely more sympathetic than parasympathetic. Yeah.
So one thing that I'll add is toward the end of my career, I did discover meditation. I discovered meditation early in my career, but I started using cardio as an opportunity to meditate. And as much as that sounds odd, and most people dread cardio, I loved it. I absolutely learned to love it. And I read a book called The Unbeatable Mind by Mark Divine, and that shifted my perspective on cardio. And I think I read the book 30 times because it was just that powerful to me at the time. I just kept reading it over and over and over again. And it got me into box breathing. So on cardio, rather than going on cardio and just kind of not paying attention to breathing, not paying attention to anything other than the time and watching it pass, I started paying attention to my breath and simply doing a 4-4 box breath, which is, for your listeners that don't know, is 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. And doing that while you do cardio will completely shift your perception of the cardio, your sense of well-being, the amount of perceived exertion. In the beginning, it's going to suck because you're going to feel like you're gasping for air. But once you kind of settle in and lock in on that 4-4, man, it's the most peaceful, serene time. It's like doing an hour-long meditation on a treadmill or a step mill. And that was really a big shift for me. As soon as I started doing that, like everything in my life started to shift. And you start to realize that, in everything you do exists that exact opportunity. You can dread it, and you can hate it, and you can bitch about it and complain about it. Or as the word I'll use is surrender. You can surrender to it, embrace it, smile, breathe through it, and all of a sudden things are enjoyable. And that exists in everything, man, everything.
Yeah, because we all assume we know how to breathe, but very few of us actually breathe because we shallow breath all the time, because it's something that's subconscious as opposed to creating consciousness out of it. And like you said, I think meditation is a big part of it. And you don't have to be in a quiet room. You could be on a plane, you could be in a car, you could be doing your cardio. You just need to be conscious of it, And, with that meditation, I love the meditation. I like it. Do you know as Emily Fletcher of Ziva Meditation?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
See, I love that style of meditation where you meditate, you have your mindfulness, and you finish with that manifestation to kind of set you up for the day. You've become very successful since bodybuilding and towards the end of your bodybuilding career in business. Do you think meditation actually had a part of that, where you were kind of manifesting exactly what you wanted from the career that you were pursuing?
Looking back on it, I didn't know at the time, but looking back on it now, absolutely. And this idea of manifestation always seems so esoteric and woo-woo, when people are like, oh, bullshit, you're manifesting. Man, it happens all the time in my life, all the time. And it's just like, how did that just happen? Like, I thought about that 15 minutes ago and it just appeared. And at the time, it was like, there's no way that's going to happen. And boom. It's so interesting. But so I don't know that I attribute, maybe, because I never made that correlation, but meditation I see with so many tangible benefits, right? Those are things that we'll call intangible. Like, I can't predict that. Maybe there's these synchronicities that happen based on my ability to become focused and grounded. But the tangible benefits that you can receive from meditation is, like just being more calm, just being able to be more responsive rather than reactive, right? Being more present. That's huge. And I think, the one thing that I say, and I respect you more than anyone for this, is focus, right? How do you go on a 6-hour bike ride and stay focused? So focus is a superpower. Whether you want to succeed in bodybuilding, you want to succeed in business, you want to succeed in a relationship, you want to succeed in Ironman, and focus is a superpower, or it's either your greatest blessing or your biggest curse, right? It's one or the other, and it's always your choice. And I think the ability to train focus exists in meditation. And so trying to train focus when you're in the middle of a heavy set of squats, or in the middle of a heavy set of leg press or something, good luck, right? Or if you're on the bike, good luck. It's almost impossible. You have to learn that skill away from the craft and then slowly merge the two, right? So I think just the ability to sit down for 10 to 30 minutes in the morning and be present and breathe and relax your nervous system and just exist. So this idea of be rather than do, right? And that's kind of how I present meditation to people, is like, stop doing and just be. And if you can spend 15 to 30 minutes doing that every day, your life will shift in every way.
Yeah, no doubt. And, it's needed now more than ever because we're constantly distracted. We're being marketed to be distracted the whole time. And I would always consider, and I still do, my bike rides as my digital detox. That's what I'd call it. Okay, I'm going out to my 6-hour digital detox where, I'm going to be out. I'm not going to get distracted. The phone is off. I don't have the phone. And it's my time to keep my focus on myself, on the breath, on the sound of the road underneath the wheels, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. It's just being present because we're constantly distracted and being reactive. So going back to the nutrition now again, because I know that you experiment a lot, but I want to take this back to your bodybuilding comparison days now. You said that, okay, maybe you'd change the way that you'd eat and what you absorb, but what about the definition of that diet? Would you go a little higher in the fats? Because typical old school bodybuilding would be very low fats, higher carbohydrates, you trim the carbs as you get ready for a show? Or would you start looking a little bit more into like a keto approach or a cyclical keto approach or anything like that? You know,
probably not, to be honest. So I don't think I would use keto. I don't think I use cyclical keto. I think carbohydrates are too much of a necessity to performance. Now, that being said, it would be the type of scenario where I think it's minimum effective dose to get the maximum result, right? And that's very subjective, but you know, I wouldn't aim to eat 1,000 grams of carbs every day, right? I'd aim to say like, what was the smallest amount I could possibly get away with and still have maximum performance? Because we know that an excess of carbohydrates is not in any way contributing to anything positive in your body. So it's just an excess, right? And whereas an excess of fats could potentially improve protein synthesis, it could improve, you know, hormonal balance, it can decrease inflammation. So I think I'd like to have an abundance of calories coming from fats. That being said, like, I'm not afraid of carbohydrates as an athlete. I think carbohydrates are absolutely essential. I think a lot of people are afraid of them just because everything in life goes in waves, right? I've done keto, I've done carnivore. I love it. I think it's wonderful. I think everyone should do it at some point in the year. If I was a bodybuilder, I would also do it at some point of the year. When would I do it? When did I do it? Toward the end of my career, right after a contest. Or like so when, you know, you get this, when you're training for a contest, I'm training 2 to 3 times a day. My calories are relatively low at that point. My output is relatively high, and so you're done a contest. Now everyone's going to stop doing cardio, train less, and eat more. Well, what does that look like, right? Recipe for disaster. So for 4 to 12 weeks after a contest, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, go into a keto phase, where your training volume is less, your cardio is less. So make your body's ability to use fat better, maybe decrease inflammation, keep inflammation low for a longer period of time. That would be something I would do differently. And I would certainly take a cyclical approach, man. I think the biggest mistake people make in bodybuilding is not matching their training to the nutrition. So most nutritionists out there, and nutritionists out there are going to get angry with me for this, but most nutritionists will write you a program and say, go train. If you're training to be an athlete, that makes no sense from my perspective. And I'd love to hear where you sit on this. You build the training program first, and you make the nutrition match that. Like, I need to know your training is graduating, is ascending in a proper direction. I need to have the training variables controlled, and then I eat to support high level performance, not the other way around. Most nutritionists are going to build your nutrition plan and go train. That makes no sense to me. I need to train well. I need to train hard. Every day is like my Olympic gold medal, right? I need to be at my absolute peak. What can I do to be training for an Olympic gold medal today? So what I need to do to fuel that yesterday.
Yeah, I agree, because like you've got to look at the cardio, the training, the nutrition as like this 3-legged stool. If one of those isn't created for the other, the stool is going to fall over. You know, I've got a lot of video series out there, so people will say, hey, can I combine this training with this nutrition or vice versa? Well, no, it's been created. Of course, everybody's different. It is cookie cutter to a certain degree. However, it is created to work together synergistically, whether it's a training day, non-training day, like you said, post-contest, preparing for a strength training event or whatever. But one thing I'd like to know, because there's a lot of people out there, including myself, I'm like, okay, I want to continue to train like a bodybuilder. I want to support muscle growth. However, I also want to increase my health span. And I know if I'm always eating and with carbohydrates, like 6 times a day, I am signaling my mTOR pathway, which may not be good for my future health. Mm-hmm. But I want to now signal my AMPK pathway. So would you suggest, as being a bodybuilder, that people maybe fast on non-training days, maybe twice a week, 5 days a week? You know, how would somebody, and maybe not a professional bodybuilder, we're not talking about professional bodybuilder, we're just talking about somebody who wants like a good physique.
Yeah.
You know, like physique athletes.
Yeah. So anyone who's aspiring to train at a high level, if you have the capacity to train at a high level, you support it with carbohydrates. I strongly believe that. And I think there's a time to go into a ketogenic state, but even most of my keto clients, I still give them a targeted keto approach, which means around that workout, I'm going to give you a little bit of carbohydrate to support. And the reason for that is not everyone gets this. Carbohydrates and insulin are your best way to modulate stress, best way to modulate cortisol. You know this as an endurance athlete, man. Your cortisol skyrockets. What's the best way to bring it down? Carbs. Fast, right? So if someone tends to be high stress or tends to train really hard, you're producing a lot of cortisol. So I want to try to modulate that as quickly as possible, get you out of that stress response, get you out of that sympathetic arousal, bring you into the parasympathetic. So for most people, I'd recommend on days when you're training hard, you add in a little bit of carbohydrate. Now that doesn't have to be a lot. It can be anywhere from 30 to 40, 50 grams, right? It doesn't have to be a huge amount, just enough to modulate the nervous system to allow your body to start calming down. Beyond that, one thing that I've actually been experimenting with a little bit is a protein sparing modified fast, which is basically this idea of low amounts of have you heard of like Prolon, like
yeah, Dr. Volta.
Exactly. So that kind of stuff I think is a really good thing to experiment with for people looking to maintain muscle and lose fat. Man, I've experimented with everything like yourself. And I find when I fast, I honestly, so again, maybe I'm an exception, and I'm experimenting with this with some of my coaches as well. I'm an exception because I have a tremendously high amount of muscle mass, but I tend to lose muscle as well as fat, right? And I think that is a problem. Like if I'm fasting, I don't necessarily want to lose all my muscle because that's going to slow my metabolism. I'm going to lose my strength, and maybe I lose my motivation because now I'm not as strong. It's a problem. So I think this idea of a restricted eating window is very useful, but you have to kind of play with, am I getting enough protein to sustain my muscle? Or am I breaking down muscle? Am I breaking down fat? And I think making sure your body's always in a state to use more fat than it is to use glycogen, right? And I think that's a big piece of it. So yes, I'm looking at where the calories are coming from, but even more than that, I'm looking at what substrate is my body tending to want to use more, right? So your body can always flip between fats and carbohydrates. So if you're someone who's stressed, if your breathing rate is elevated, if your heart rate is elevated, your body's going to use more carbohydrate at rest. We know that. So how do we then get your body using more fat at rest? So why does that matter? If I'm using carbohydrate at rest, when I run through carbohydrate, my body tends to start breaking down protein, right? So start breaking down your muscle. Whereas if I'm using fat at rest, your body will tend to obviously just use fat, and we've got an abundance of fat. So how do I do that? Well, getting out of the sympathetic arousal, decreasing the breathing rate, making sure you're breathing through your nose, doing all these things to make sure you're staying in the more aerobic system, which is just ultimately improving your aerobic fitness, right? Improving your body's ability to use tolerate CO2, tolerate carbon dioxide, and use fat at rest.
Right. Okay. Got it.
Because that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So one thing that I try to suggest to a lot of clients, of course, like I said, they're not heavily muscled, is incorporate some sort of fasting. Now, as we know, as bodybuilders, then 12 hours could be a fast. Yeah. Because, that person is eating just before bed, sometimes in the night or whatever. But now, based on my experience, I do try to include some type of fast. Now, sometimes that can be a controlled fast. So, i.e., they're still having essential amino acids. They're drinking essential amino acids through that fasting window to help them preserve muscle mass and maintain muscle protein synthesis. If you get a client fasting, or if you're fasting yourself, are you consuming anything? Or you following, like you said, the Volta Longo approach where you're having low calories? Yeah,
sometimes it honestly depends, Chris, like what I'm trying to do in that time. But so if I'm trying to maintain muscle mass and ultimately improve my body's ability to synthesize protein, I will remove protein completely, and that includes amino acids, but I still may have some fat. I may include some olive oil, I may include some MCT or something like that, because I know it's not going to spike my insulin. And that's a big consideration for me. It's like, how low can I get my resting insulin levels, right? That's what I'm aiming for when I fast. So like, I want to have resting insulin levels, in the 60s. And that's what I believe seems to be resting glucose levels in the 60s, resting insulin levels significantly low. That's what I believe is most correlated with health. Like, what's your insulin response look like? What does your insulin sensitivity look like? Like, if we can keep that controlled, I think the ability to maintain health span goes up. And because we know with insulin and carbohydrate, inflammation is going up. Insulin resistance is a huge issue. Oxidative stress goes up. Like, all those things are big issues. So that's kind of how I gauge it. So if you're someone who has, poor insulin, high glucose, poor insulin sensitivity, that's where fasting becomes a way bigger consideration for me, because I want you to intentionally fast to get that resting blood sugar and insulin level down.
Right. Okay. Now, I'm going to completely switch gears here because I listened to your podcast with Ryan Smith, which was a phenomenal, great podcast.
Thanks. He's amazing.
Yeah, really, really good. Now, so obviously, talking about the subject of peptides, and there's peptides out there that can actually lower blood glucose response as well. Are you an advocate of using peptides for that, or just being totally utilizing a dietary approach, or berberine, or some form of activity post meal?
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't seen any peptides that actually effectively, at least for me or my clients, move resting blood glucose or insulin. I haven't seen any. So there's some that speculatively, the data says it could help, like thymosin A1. I've seen tremendous benefits from thymosin A1 as far as decreasing inflammation, improving just sense of well-being. but haven't really seen any benefit as far as insulin and insulin sensitivity. I'm a huge fan of peptides, to be honest, just because of the hyper-targeted specificity of the molecules, right? So when we take a growth hormone, we take a testosterone, we take a insulin, it's very generic. It's a broad stroke approach. It doesn't, it's not specific to a tissue. Whereas with peptides, we can laser target a very specific response. And I think that's awesome. So the only one that I think, I mean, you tell me which ones you've heard of actually improved insulin, but so the MOTS-C, which is one that's relatively new that I've heard is relatively efficient for improving mitochondrial efficiency and improving maybe blood sugar. The other one is thymosin A1. I haven't heard a lot about other ones, and those are the ones I've experimented with.
Well, I'm not going to name a name, but there's somebody that I know has just, and he measures his blood glucose. He's got a 24-hour blood glucose monitor, and he started taking ipamorelin and CJC 1295, and he noticed that his blood sugar levels has dropped quite considerably.
Only while you're on it. Only while you're on it. That's the same as growth hormone, right? Same thing happens. So you'll have an acute drop and then it'll spike. So I don't think that's a long-term benefit, right? I think that's a short-term acute adaptation to actually the growth hormone response in the body.
Right. Okay. Got it. So you'd have to take it quite frequently in order to get some sort of adaptive response.
Yeah, if at all, right? It may actually do the opposite. I'd like to see what, ask him if you're a friend with him, ask what happens when it stops. Does it upregulate or downregulate, right? I would presume it's going to upregulate.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. You hear how many bodybuilders you hear become insulin resistant because of it for growth hormone, right?
Right.
Tons.
Yeah.
Like after 4 to 6 weeks in growth hormone, you have to start taking insulin because otherwise you wake up and your blood sugar is 125. Right. So same idea. So the first 4 weeks, your blood sugar tends to drop. You get people who are like, oh man, I feel amazing. My blood sugar is great. My insulin regulation is awesome. And then after a short amount of time, your body will upregulate and then you're going to lose the insulin sensitivity. So ask him. I'm curious.
Okay. All right. I will do. Now, I know, you've had several experts on your podcast speaking about peptides. I know that you're a fan of peptides yourself. So I'd like to know your take. What peptides that you like and why?
Yeah, I keep my regimen pretty tight, man, pretty small. Thymosin A1 is kind of like the way I've used maybe the master reset. I think anytime you start new a peptide protocol, that's a good place to start. You just feel better, man. Your sense of well-being goes up. Epidolon is one that I like a lot, and thymulin. So those two together are doing amazing things to people's body and collagen. So like your wrinkles go away, your sense of your perceived well-being goes up. You just look healthy. You look like you're turning back the clock, and it's pretty tremendous, man. So that's
which one was that?
It's Epitalin or Epidolon.
Oh, so yeah. that helps with the
telomeres.
Yeah, telomeres, of course. Okay, and that's something that you take. Well, some people say take it twice a year, and then other people. I heard a female talk about it recently. I can't remember what maybe it's Ben Greenfield's podcast, and she takes it every day.
Well, yeah. Again, that may not be the brightest idea. I don't know. Like again, everything in the world is experimenting, right? Everything. So. My suggestion is maybe 10 days every 3 months.
Yeah.
So you usually do a 10-day course, and some people say 10 days every 6 months. 10 days every 3 months. I've got some friends experimenting with that. It seems to go over very, very well. And if you combine that with thymulin, which is not the same as the first one I said, which is thymulin, it tends to work better. And again, I don't know mechanistically. I'm certainly not an expert in that space, but it tends to work better. And the other two that I'm a huge fan of is BPC 157 and TB 500. I think everybody's heard of those by now, and especially anyone who's pushing it in sports. Those are amazing. And then you've got like as you mentioned, the ipamorelin, the tesamorelin, which I think is even better, the CJC, all these other things that are potentially useful. And the best resource for these, I mean, Ryan Smith, the What Podcast said, he's unbelievable. There's a guy out of Russia named Vladimir Kavinson, Khavinson. He's the godfather of peptides, man. He's got a great website, and you go on there and he's got all the cool thing about it. He's been doing research for, I think, since the 60s. So he's got 30-year research studies, like checking back on people after 15 and 30 years. And that's super interesting to see what does the mortality rate do? What does the illness rate do? And it's pretty tremendous what they're seeing there. And I never know. I always, the skeptic in the back of my mind always goes, well, are they doctoring this for the public to see? Because ultimately you never know, like countries like Russia and China, not to speak bad about anybody, but they're often trying to, the idea of show us one thing, but the reality is something different. So who knows? But it seems like I've actually talked to one of his lab assistants pretty extensively, and he seems like it's pretty incredible stuff. So he's got some really interesting things there. And Panilion is another one, which is maybe going to improve or decrease the calcification of the pineal gland, improve your brain's ability to function. Really interesting stuff.
Interesting. What do you know the name of that website so I can put that in the show notes?
Cavinson.info. So his last name .info, I believe. It's either .info or .org, but I think it's .info.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Okay. Thank you. Now, before we wrap this up, obviously you are heavily invested into the biohacking side. And, this is something that I really, really respect about you, that you are constantly evolving and learning new things that you share, obviously, through your platforms and your podcasts, that you found as being efficacious for you. We talk about peptides, and we could talk about peptides that help with sleep, and obviously your heart rate variability. What are the main things that you follow throughout your day that has really helped with your sleep, heart rate variability, overall well-being? Okay, we've covered meditation, of course. What else is there that people could apply, whether it costs something or whether it's free, that you found has worked for you?
Yeah, how long you got?
I got time.
Yeah. Like you, I'm sure, Chris, there's a lot of things out there that can get you a really small bump in the needle, right? And I'm not looking for those, right? I'm looking for the big rocks. What are the things that I know they're going to move the needle for me in a big way? So is there something that can decrease my stress? Is there something that can improve my sleep? Is there something that can improve my inflammation and digestion? Those are kind of the rocks that I'm after, right? So for sleep, I think everyone should have an Oura ring. I think you have an Oura ring. I'm a huge fan of the Oura ring. Yeah. I think just being able to quantify what you're doing and go, hey man, my REM sleep sucks. What do we do? How do I change it? And be able to make an intelligent decision like, hey man, I had 2 glasses of wine last night and my REM sleep tanked. Okay. Or my deep sleep tanked. Okay. Well, let's not do that anymore. Right. I think that as much as it's not really a biohack, that the idea of biometrics is vital. And the other thing that I would say about the Oura ring that makes it an essential piece of my repertoire is HRV. Heart rate variability. If people don't understand heart rate variability and listen to this podcast, I highly suggest you start researching it. And it can be as complex or as simple as you want it to be, but understand it and measure it. And the Oura ring is the easiest way to do it, and see where you are. And it's never a measure against you. It's never a measure against me. It's always just a measure against yourself, right? So I suggest people do that. What else do I do that's kind of relevant? Now, I think taking care of your oral health is a really big deal. I'm kind of obsessed with that. So most people don't acknowledge this reality that you have this microbiome that exists in your mouth, and that interacts with the microbiome in your stomach, and it kind of acts like a sensor, like, hey, what's going on in the outside world? What's going on in the inside world? So paying attention to your oral health and make sure you're always very, and I wouldn't say hygienic, I don't think you should take the bacteria out, but you should be conscious of what bacteria is in your mouth, right? So making sure you're flossing consistently, you're brushing, not using any the alcohol-based rinses or anything like that, paying close attention to this microbiome that exists ultimately in your mouth is vital. It's something I do multiple times a day, and super aware of oral hygiene having a huge impact on many things. Biohacks.
What about lights?
What is it? Lights. Oh man. I honestly don't have lights in my house. You'd laugh. All the lights in my house, the only ones I have is the Edison bulbs, the 2200 Kelvin bulbs. And I barely use them. If the sun is down and time to chill out, I'll sometimes put a lamp on to read or something. And I do my best, especially with my kids, man. I want them to realize once the sun is down, it's time to start winding down and connecting with your loved ones and being present. And I think it's such an opportunity. So the way that motivates me is that I just have to put the pedal down harder during the day so that I am able to decompress and disconnect at the end of the day. But yeah, man, I'm more neurotic about light than I wish I was, especially when I travel or in hotels. I'm so I'm always wearing the nerd glasses, the blue light blockers. And it's I'm always doing stuff like that. I'm super neurotic about EMF. I'm super neurotic about light. I'm super neurotic about smells actually, man, which is, people don't always acknowledge air quality, but I think, when you start to acknowledge, if you haven't read Anthony J really well, if you haven't read his book, Estrogeneration, read it. Yeah. Acknowledging all of the environmental pollutants that are literally just wreaking havoc on our body, on our hormonal system, our endocrine system, on our brains. You start to know that it's almost a blessing and a curse. Because I'm just walking through public places and I wish I was wearing my COVID mask all the time. It might become a permanent piece of my wardrobe. But yeah, so you're somewhere, you're breathing fumes, you're breathing perfumes, you're breathing candles, all this shit is ultimately, and I try not to be neurotic about it, man, but I'm aware of it. So it's always a challenge when you're aware of something and it's like, God, this is really not good for me. In an airplane, you're kind of stuck in this flying tube going through the sky, and you got to have all these terrible things that you're smelling that are ultimately getting breathed into your lungs and distributed into your blood. And people don't acknowledge how things work like that. But I'm super neurotic about like colognes and perfumes and creams and body care. Like, you laugh at the deodorant I wear is like applied by hand, and then the creams I use in my beard and shit is all like the pure stuff. Like, it's just like purest things that exist. They're all edible. I'm very, very neurotic about what goes on to my body and into my body.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Well, obviously, it's the biggest organ in our body. And, I have an app that I'll shout out now, and it's called Think Dirty. So I suggest people to scan things before they purchase it, knowing that the soap that they're putting on or the deodorant could have possible cancerogenic effects, a lot of heavy metal contaminants. So a lot of people don't realize that since I think it's the 1920s, we've been exposed to like 88,000 more paints, lacquers, these contaminants, and a lot of them live in our homes, our own homes, where they come from the fabric or from like the lacquer on my treadmill desk here right now. That, we do definitely have to purify the air in our house, whether it comes from plants, purification or whatever, and water as well. We're consuming water every day. And, I have a new reverse osmosis tank just put in my kitchen now with a remineralizer. A lot of people don't understand, especially if you look at the blue zones, the high level of magnesium and calcium they have in the water that we don't have right here now. And people just don't think about it. They just chug, water like it's going out of style, not knowing what they're putting into their systems.
Yeah, especially like chlorine and fluoride and those things we just know are crushing everybody. Man, I just made a huge investment into a whole house water filter as well. I'm like, man, it doesn't matter to me. Like any amount of money, I'll figure out how to make it. You put it in, you make sure you get the best quality water coming through the house. I've got similar to you, man. I've got like the 5-stage reverse osmosis. I've got the vortexer. I've got the structured water. Like I've got the granddaddy of the water filters.
And I bet you're putting cucumbers in your water jug as well to structure it even more.
No, but I'll start.
You got to start now. Just one more thing, because you mentioned the EMF. Like over the past 48 hours, I just noticed there's been a lot of this being put online because 5G has been thrown up everywhere, including the UK. People are out there with their readers showing, how high the radiation is at the moment. Yeah. One thing, what do you suggest for people to do to help scramble or block EMF?
Yeah, I don't know if you just gotta, proximity seems to be the issue, right? So like, I'm in my house, I'm always plugged into the computer. I'm not usually on a Wi-Fi signal. And as long as there's not anybody close to me, like my phone is always on airplane mode. Everyone hates me because they text me and I don't get back for days, which I'm sure at some point you've experienced as well. Like I just don't put it on. Like I don't want it on anywhere near me, especially when I'm with my family. Yeah, man, I just do my best to avoid proximity. Like I think it's ubiquitous now. You're not going to avoid it. Like, to be honest, again, I'm not going to shout out to this because these have been sent to me without me paying for it. But like, people are making EMF blocking underwear. Have you got those yet?
Yeah, lambs. I got
wearing them right now. Yeah. EMF blocking pants. I've got. Someone's making me a shirt. Like I think they're making me a hat. I was like, man, I don't know. Like, fuck. At the end of the day, I mean, so I'll be honest. Like, I'm the canary in the coal mine, man. If there's EMF in the area, I'll tell you. I can tell you like this. I can feel it. Which I don't know if it's good or bad. But I can feel like I'm so in tune with the way I feel when I meditate now that I can feel like, hey, there's something wrong in this place. We got to go over there, including my phone. I can feel if it's in my hand. I can feel it's in my pocket. So again, that may or may not be a good indication of my level of health, but my level of awareness is high, and I'll intentionally go like, we got to move. We got to get out of here. Like, and I think the way to mitigate it maybe is just getting in touch with the earth more often, right? So it's just different frequencies. And if you get in touch with the earth, with that resonant Schumann frequency that should exist if it's a natural environment, that's the key, I think, to getting balanced. You're going to get subjected to it, but maybe every day you have a sanctuary in your house where you're like, yeah, or in your yard, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to lay in the grass and I'm going to, lay here and meditate or sit here and meditate. My kids and I play outside, no shirts, no shoes every day. That's kind of our ritual, man. No matter what we're doing, it's no shirts, no shoes. And, hopefully we're not always on concrete. Sometimes we are, but sometimes we're getting in the grass and kind of just trying to reconnect with that resonant frequency.
Yeah, for sure. Earthing for sure is a big
right.
deal. Like I always do it in my house as well. I have the earthing mat, earthing bed sheets, because there's a lot of people out there that are just living in apartments and they just don't have access, especially now that we're locked down, to earthing themselves. But Ben, thank you ever so much for your time. I was going through a lot of the questions here because I knew there was a lot to cover. I still feel that we've just only scratched the surface. So, I'm going to be hounding you to get back onto the podcast, sir. And I'm going to put all the links that we've spoken about in the show notes. But Ben, if people were to find you and want to find more about your training style, MI40, the courses that you have, all the content, where should they go?
Just the word muscle intelligence tends to be synonymous with my name. So the Muscle Intelligence Podcast, muscleintelligence.com is a great place to go. I mean, there's many other places to do that, or Instagram is usually where if I'm going to check social, that'll be where it is. And that's BPAC Fitness. So my first and last B and my initial and PAK last name and then fitness. It's a good place to find me.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Ben. Really appreciate having your knowledge on the show. So everybody, this is another episode of the Knowledge and Mileage Podcast. Until next week, we is out.